Welcome back to yet another episode of Marketing, Management, and Money. I am your host, Ryan Murray.
And I'm your host, Ryan Owens.
So today we are going to talk about your business process. And I really want to look at this. First off, every business has a process. Some of them are good and some of them are really bad. Mm-hmm. So, your process might be chaos, disorder, and confusion. But it's still your process. Like, you show up every day to your business, not really sure what you're doing, running around, trying to get your employee to help out, and they're just not doing what you want. Like that could be your process. Yeah. We're hoping that you get a better process. And so maybe by the end of this episode, you've got some ideas of how you can improve your process. Because honestly, you can always improve your process. In fact, you were talking about kind of business being an escalator. And I love that analogy if you want to kind of share that.
So I love this topic. For whatever reason, this is something that I stumbled across and latched onto. Process improvement it's just fun to me. I don't know. It's just a challenge. It's like a little game of Donkey Kong every time I come into contact with something. Nerd. I know, right? It's weird. I feel like this is what finance is for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, last episode, you were totally making fun of me for geeking out on the finance. And here you're all just like, but I love organizing things and making a process go together.
Yeah, let's make it faster. You want to talk about a bottleneck? Yeah. Anyway, no, honestly though, I love it. So this analogy that I have is process or small business in a lot of ways, in terms of your process and things, is like an escalator, a down escalator, right? So if you are in the mall, whatever, you can go up a floor or you can go down a floor on an escalator. This is like the one you go down on, right? So except for small businesses start at the bottom of the down escalator. And so in order to get up that, and entrepreneurs know this, you know what I mean?
You're swimming upstream.
Yeah, you're swimming upstream. You got to book it to get any movement going forward, right? And it's interesting to watch small businesses because, a lot of times they have this fire, they get running up the bottom of that down escalator, right? And they're making some movement upward, but then it gets old and tired and monotonous and the same things keep happening. They're putting out the same fires. And so they kind of lose their fire, right? They lose that energy and they stop pushing like they used to, right? And unfortunately, that's not just like you're staying in the same spot. You're moving backward because that escalator is still moving down.
Right.
And so in order to keep going, you've got to keep pushing. You've got to find new ways all the time to take it to that next level, to take it to the next step, because if you're not, you're moving backwards automatically. And if you are, constantly coming into your small business and it's just chaos and crazy and everything, and you're essentially running down that small business escalator, you're moving down super quick because you're going down and the escalator's going down. So it compounds it, right?
Yeah. So I want to put out the first tip here, and that is entrepreneurs make this mistake. Rookie entrepreneurs make this mistake. And that is that they feel like being busy is the same as being productive.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
And, I see this happen in people who really haven't been around the block. Like, this is their first rodeo, and they're just like, oh, man, look, I did this. Look at all these things I did. And I'm just like, oh, you're killing me here. Because effective businesses, the owner is sitting there in kind of almost a Zen state where there's time to think, there's clarity, there's downtime. And if you're constantly running, you don't have any time to ever think and reflect and, have vision for your company.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times you'll hear, are you working, in your business or are you working on your business? And if you're always stuck working in your business, that means no one's working on your business.
Yeah.
And so, we've got these analogies, the escalator, the idea of working on your business. So how do you start? How do you put together a good process?
Yeah. So I feel like this can be a little bit intimidating to some small business owners or entrepreneurs. I see them approach this topic of process improvement, and it's this big deal, and you have to be certified, like ISO 9000 certified,
Right.
and you got to have a lean coordinator and all this stuff. You don't. Okay. Honestly, process improvement is not scary, and it's way simple. It can really honestly be super duper simple.
And
so
everyone needs to be doing it. If you are a solo entrepreneur, you have a process.
Yep.
And you need to understand it, and you need to improve it. If you have a team of 5, you have a process, and you need to understand it, and you need to improve it. You don't. There's not a size too small or a size too big where all of a sudden this is no longer relevant. It's relevant for every business.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I would recommend in order to start this is like you mentioned, you got to take a step back. You have to get away from putting out the fires. You got to get away from all of the craziness of the day-to-day and step back. And you have to look at the whole process and everything that's going on. Now, if you want to take that from the perspective of your entire small business, fine. If you choose to take that from the perspective of, I'm only going to look at what I do for sales, awesome. You pick the area that you want to improve, and you look at the entire process of that area.
But Ryan, I'm so busy. I don't have time. I mean, that's why I'm always putting out fires, because I don't have time.
And that's the bane of process improvement's existence, is there will always be an excuse to not do it.
And I'm so glad you used the word excuse.
Yeah. And that's what it is. There's always an excuse. There's always, like you said, there's always something you can find to do.
Mm-hmm.
My question that I ask a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of small business owners is essentially, and I feel like I ask this question a lot. Maybe this is my second tattoo. The first one is it depends. The second one is, so what? Like, what impact did that task or that activity have on your small business? If that didn't drive toward increasing sales, frickin' don't do it.
Yeah. And, if that fire was burning yesterday and you don't put it out today, it's still going to burn tomorrow. But guess what? You're in the same boat you were in.
Yeah. There are definitely things that every small business owner, every entrepreneur can let go of for a half an hour, an hour.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, shut your door, lock it. I don't care if it's your car door, sit out in the parking lot, find a park bench. I don't care.
In the shade, please.
Yeah. Right. Especially now, this time of year. But, take a minute to reflect on, like, pick that process, write it down and isolate that. Only look at that process. And again, it's really easy to get drawn into, well, that connects into the accounting and that connects. No, we're not looking at that. We're looking at the specific process, right?
Okay, so what does that look like when we're getting specific? So if someone's like, okay, I'm here, I just locked myself in my room, and I know I want to focus on sales.
Sure.
Now what?
So you look at what you're currently doing. And this is current. This isn't what I hope to be doing or what I think I should be doing or what I've done in the past. But today, currently, if you were to run through your sales process quickly, write down the highlights of what that would be. Is it cold calling first and then reaching out to existing customers second? Or is it sending, is sending thank yous to your customers part of your process? Is there some sort of a promotional aspect to this? What is it that you're doing?
So I'm going to make a recommendation here.
Sure.
And that is, the tendency is to try and figure out what ground zero is. Where did we launch from? I honestly think it's easier to go in reverse and take the last sale that you made.
Yeah.
And say, okay, I know I made a sale. Because if you're trying to figure out ground zero, sometimes you get a little bit theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go with an actual sale and be like, okay, I just made this sale 15 minutes ago. So 15 minutes ago, I was able to close this deal. What led up to, why did that person walk into my showroom? to begin with.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I found out that they walked in because of a referral from someone else who had bought from me. And, in the referral, I found out that they were talking about the, amazing expertise that our company had. And so that's why they came to us, is because they had some questions and they wanted that expertise. And so you're walking it backwards to find out, okay, this is what my process looks like, in reverse. Flip it around, boom, we've got it.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. So once you get that, the next part for me, so I have this knack. And then the reason why I stumbled on this process, or that I enjoy process improvement so much, is because I have a knack for being able to step back and look at a whole process and understand it and understand its elements and kind of pick it apart, right?
Yeah.
But the next part is really where I start to salivate because it seriously almost takes me back to this little kid level of sitting in front of the TV playing Donkey Kong. And it's when you're doing process improvement, it's a lot like that. If you're playing a level of a video game that's like a side scroller, I don't know if you guys know what that is. If you don't, look it up. It's like Mario, right? It just runs, not like N64 type Mario. This is like SNES type Mario. It just goes from one side to the other. You lost so many people. I know. It's just flat, two-dimensional, goes from one side to the other. You just run along, right? But it's like if you get to a difficult level, something that you can't do, right? You try it and you try it again. And you're like, man, that didn't work. And you're like, well, maybe I need to jump over this, or maybe I need to wait a little longer here, or whatever. That is to a T exactly what process improvement is. And, you kind of get better at it as you do it. But people tend to think that process improvement is like, okay, well, I know what change that I need to make, and I make that, and everything is great after that. No. It's a lot of trial and error a lot of times, and you have to give it time. A lot of times you'll be taking a step back, right? And in a really tangible way to see this is when you're producing some sort of a product, if you can get down on the assembly line and you're like, okay, this step of putting this widget onto this other widget and screwing them together, this is how we currently do it. How can I do this faster? The moment that you change anything, unless it just so happens, and this won't happen, very unlikely, unless it just so happens that what you do is the perfect remedy right then and there, what's going to happen is it's going to slow down what you were currently doing, right? It's going to take away from that process. And it won't be until you've done that 3 or 4 or 40 or 400 times that you're like, oh yeah, okay, if I do it like this and then this, then it gets faster. It's like you have to
be willing to take a step back to take 3 steps forward.
Yeah. And you have to try a ton of different variables and see what's going to work and see what doesn't work. And again, as you get more experienced with this, as you've done it a few dozen times, it's like you kind of intuitively can tell what's not going to work and what will. And so you kind of can cancel out all of those, the vast majority of things that won't work. And then your process improvement becomes a lot quicker and a lot simpler. So
I had the opportunity. I'm almost embarrassed to admit how many different training programs I've gone to of, hey, you can do this, and it got to the point that you started filtering through. There's some bad training programs out there. There's some amazing training programs out there, and one of the amazing ones is Kaizen training. And this is what you're talking about. I know it's a goofy word. It's a Japanese word that I think it means small improvement or something along those lines. The gist of it is that you will have more success making lots of little improvements than trying to hit a home run every single time. Don't try and score big. Try and score little consistently. And, it's been studied in numerous examples that is the better way to go. And that's what you're talking about here is you're saying process improvement. You're like, make that little tweak and keep working on that tweak until you've got some improvement going on. So if you have an opportunity to do some Kaizen training, I highly recommend it. That was some of the training that really changed my perspective on how I run my businesses and how I consult others in their businesses. But that's what we're talking about here is that small, continuous improvement. Don't try and hit those home runs. Try and be consistent.
Yeah. And that's where it comes back to being very specific about the process that you're trying to improve.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that, because one of the things, as I was consulting businesses, most of them didn't know their own process.
Yeah.
And, you're sitting here saying you got to be specific about that. How do you get specific? Like, do you recommend writing it down? Do you recommend that, how do you map it out? What happens when you've got a blank and you're just like, I don't know exactly how I get from step A to step C. There's a B in there somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know what B is. And that will happen. You'll be trying to figure out your process and you're like, it's like putting together, a big old puzzle.
Yeah.
And you start with the edges because those are easy. And then you start putting together, all the bright colored pieces, but then you've got like these big old holes.
Yep.
And you're like, I don't exactly know how to fill in these holes. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I see with small business owners oftentimes is that they, like you said, they get so caught up in the day-to-day, the minutia of things, getting this done and that done and putting out this fire and that fire. And, by 8 p.m., they're like, holy crap, where did the day go? And I still have 1,000 things to do. And in those instances, it really is easy to kind of not be able to understand the entire process all the time.
Too many moving parts.
Right. Especially if you are to that level where it's like you've hired an employee or two employees and you're like, I just need you to be amazing and do what you do. And
read my mind.
Please help me. You know what I mean? Like, you're not saying that. You're like this confident, I've started my own business, but you're like, oh my gosh, please help me.
Just know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And in those instances, you trust these people to kind of do their thing. And, everybody does things a little bit differently.
Right.
Right. Obviously there are some ways that are better of doing things than others, but when you trust these people to do those things, you can lose, like you're saying, you can lose grasp of the whole process. You can lose sight of, the whole vision or the whole map of things, how they currently are.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of already talked about, I really like how you brought that up, because we talked about earlier about taking time. You have to take time and step back. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned writing it down. It can be done in a myriad of different ways, however you want to keep track of that. But that's important, is that it has to be clear, and you need to be able to revisit it. Okay?
So if you want to test if you're clear, try explaining it to someone.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And if they're at the end of a brief session, like if you can't explain your process in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh, I wouldn't even go that far.
Like it needs to be concise and easily understood to the point that like the person saying, okay, I totally get this. But if they're still confused, it's not that they're confused, it's that you're confusing. And it means that you don't have your process dialed in. And so once you have it, written down, or, if you're like, oh, it's all in my head, fine. Share it with somebody and see if they can, spit it back to you. If they can't, it's not there.
And I honestly, I would give it 30 seconds.
Man, you're tight.
Oh, for sure. Well, but that's the thing. Like, you're the small business owner. You have to understand it to that level to be able to be comfortable enough to go in and make the changes that need to be made. You need to be able to be that clear on it that you can go in and do the trial and error and not be repeating some of the things that are already occurring or have already been done.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to know it. So I want to come back to this, like, where do you start? How do you know? So, okay, if I've locked myself in my car, right? I'm done weeping in the back because of all the craziness that I'm avoiding right now, or I'm putting off, that I'm feeling terrible about.
Right.
And I've got my notepad and everything in hand. I have my Wave that I'm going to keep track of that, however that is, your smartphone or whatever. And you write out your process, right? Like you said, if there are holes in it, if there are things that you aren't clear about, the number one best way that I have found that's the actual practical, you'll find different like theoretical ways of doing this or whatever.
Sure.
But the number one best practical way that I have found with working with small businesses to be able to fill in those gaps is to go do it yourself.
As the owner, if you need to get down on your production line, go get down on your production line. Put that widget together with, those screws, the same equipment, whatever. So if you're making a sales call, fill out the sales order.
Yeah.
And then go and put it into the computer system and, generate the PO.
Yeah. Whatever that is. So I guess let me step back a little bit. How I look at this is, again, my intuitive nature is to follow a process through, understand the whole process, as a whole, what's the beginning and what's the end result, what comes out of it at the end, and then break it down into smaller parts and then understand those parts. And if I don't, so I'm observing, right?
Yeah.
But beyond that, so that's all what we've all written down and everything. But beyond that, if it's like, I don't understand step 3 completely, like, wait, something's happening there that's different than step 2 and step 4, and something changes, but I'm not 100% sure what it is or how it happens, I'll observe it a little bit longer. And if I still don't get it or I need to, I interject myself into that and I say, hey, will you help me understand this? Or I'd really like to try this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I get in and I get my hands dirty and I do it. And I don't make any changes. I'm only in a learning mode until I can do it to the current standard.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Like if I'm lagging behind the other people that are assigned to do this job or that have done it in the past or whatever, or even myself, like I've done this before, but I know I did it better and I can't remember how I did it. I don't make any changes or anything until I can at least meet that same status quo kind of a deal. Once I understand that, I go back to the whole process. If I need to jump into another element, I do that. So now we understand the whole process. We filled the whole thing in. We've got the whole thing written out. We're comfortable with the whole thing. We can explain it in 30 seconds. Now you are ready to start looking at what you can do to change this thing. And
now before you go to that step, I want to just throw one thing out there, because I suspect that there are some listeners who are like, well, okay, you told me to do everything from step 1 to step 10. I do. It's my business. I run the sales, I run the accounting, I do all the purchasing, I do all the production. So I'm already running everything.
Yeah.
And that's great. You can still do what we're talking about here, run it through, because the key is to say you're not doing it for the sake of doing it. You're doing it for the sake of understanding it.
Yeah.
And so even if you've done this 100 times, go through it and jot down the notes of things that are disorderly or confusing or take too much time or, whatever. So it doesn't matter if you're stepping in and doing this for someone else in your company and experiencing what they go through, or if you're just doing it for yourself, but looking through a different lens. The process is still the same. I just wanted to point that out and make sure that people understand that process improvement, again, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, you got to be doing this.
No, I love that. That's actually exactly where I was going to go next, is that once you are through that, you obviously have noticed some red flags along the way. And like you said, hopefully you've noted those down. If you haven't, run back through it, note those down really quick. They should be pretty easy to identify, especially the one that you're going to focus on first. And that is so key. So many small business owners try to improve the whole process, start to finish. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Once you have it broken down, pick one thing, one, singular, not plural, not a couple, not a few, one. I mean, if I need to say that in like different languages, let me pull up Siri and have her help me out. But literally one thing, one, and you dive into that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
With that, it's okay if you have things that are not perfect.
yeah,
Like you could focus on one thing and have a half a dozen things that you're like, oh man, those drive me crazy.
Yeah.
But they've worked for the last several months. They'll still get you by for another few months while you improve
Right.
these other issues.
right.
There's one more thing that I'd like to touch on before we wrap up.
Yeah.
And that is, it's so important. Get a fresh set of outside eyes
Yeah.
to look at your process.
Man, you are killing it. That's exactly where I was
I'm
going
just
to go.
stealing your thunder because I
No,
know
you're great.
you're going there, and I want to take the
No,
credit.
that's good. I'm okay with that. Yeah. So once you pick that thing and you start to experiment with it and you think you've got it down to where it's like, okay, this is better. Like, and I mean, for me, that's a really exciting time in this whole process. Is you think you have something better, and if it works, then freaking awesome, right? But you won't really know after all of that experimentation until, like you said, you share it with somebody else, you compete with somebody else, or you test it against somebody else. So just kind of wrapping up here in closing, I would say that's, probably the last key thing before you implement this fully is to make sure, validate that your way of improving your process actually does improve the process.
Yeah.
And
So
as long
good.
as it's repeatable, then you're golden and move on to the next thing. Even if 7 out of 10 of the things that you were looking at were broken, it's fine. You'll get there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's awesome.
thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you so much for letting me talk about this. I love it. I love process improvement. It's a lot of fun. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to give advice. We're happy to help out where we can. We are on Twitter at MMMSmallBiz. That's at MMMSmallBiz. Hit us up there or through our website. As always, you guys are awesome. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later.
Catch you next time.